everyone, welcome back to my channel. For today's video I want to talk about my favourite eyeshadow shades. I've gone through my entire collection and pulled out a selection of different palettes, and I've gone through and picked my favourite shade from those palettes. I haven't done this with every single palette in my collection because we will be here all day, but I've effectively wanted to create my ideal palette, as it were. I've seen the creators Thingsbytheberk and Samantha do this recently. I think Samantha called it creating my all-star palette, and I think Rachel just called it her favourite shade from 20 palettes. What I wanted to do was kind of more what Sam did and create an ideal eyeshadow palette. So what I wanted to do originally was just create effectively a 12-pan eyeshadow palette using all my favourite shades, and I did quite easily do that, going through all of my palettes and picking out my shades. I actually ended up with about 16 and then managed to narrow it down where there was some that were very similar to each other, so that I have my 12 favourite shades. When I put the palette together, as it were, it was a very neutral palette, which is my aesthetic anyway, but I do occasionally like to pull into little bits of colour. Not bright colours, but little bits of colour. So I went back, had a look through some more of my palette, and I went for a further 3 shades. So I've effectively created a 15 shade eyeshadow palette. What I was doing as I was going through this process, I was taking a photo of the shades in the palette. So then when I looked at it on my photo reel, I could actually see how the palette would look as a whole. I will obviously do swatches of each of the shades as I go through, and I may, dependent on the quality, because they have been cropped and zoomed in, I might put pictures up of the individual shades, because I don't know how easy it's going to be for you to see the shade in the palette without me getting right close to the camera, which probably won't focus and I won't be able to check until editing. So I'm actually filming this on Monday with the intention of this video going up on Friday. We are currently day 1 of working from home with our child not being in school, and it was a fun day. Don't get me wrong, she was good as gold for the majority of the day, but then we had a few teething problems as she got tired towards the end of the day and a bit bored, which slightly scares me that it's day 1. And as I've sat down to film, we've heard that the country is pretty much going into lockdown. So scary times, but it's what must be done. And I know people who are watching these types of videos are trying to escape this kind of thing, but I didn't want to not mention it because it is such a big thing. So just stay safe and stay indoors, basically. And enough of that talk, let's go on to the fun stuff and talk about eyeshadow. When I've pulled these palettes together, they are inadvertently in some sort of order, in that the shimmer shades I would probably use are going to be coming up first, and then I think it's then the transition shades, and then the deeper shades, and then the 3 bits of colour that I added at the end. But now I think about it, that might make a bit more sense when I'm then swatching it on my arm. Let's roll the sleeves up for this. Let's get the wet wipes ready and let's get started. So the first palette is the BH Cosmetics Sylvia Garni palette, and this is one that I actually picked up for free by spending so much on BH Cosmetics on Beauty Bay, and I'm so glad I did because it is one of my favourite palettes. I did recently rank it in my top 5 bottom 5 eyeshadow palettes, which I will link in the cards. Obviously you can guess it in the top 5, but you'll have to watch that video to find out which position in the top 5. So my favourite shade in this palette is this gold shade here, Goddess, which I would say is a true gold. It's not too cool and it's not too warm, and it's just a nice all over lid shade, and is one that I probably reach for most of the time when I go into this palette because I do have my go-to shades. So I'm going to hold it up to camera. I don't know how good it's going to look, but I have taken the picture. This one here. And then I'll do a swatch of it. So I will start at the top because we have quite a few. So that is that shade. Next we have the e.l.f. New Classics palette. Torn between 2 shades in here, being Platinum and Gilded. I ended up going for Gilded because it is slightly different in that it's more of a green toned gold. Yeah. I'm so bad at swatching, so you'll have to excuse that, but that is that one. The next palette is the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. This is definitely one of the brighter palettes that I own. I don't reach for the bright shades an awful lot, but I like to have them in my collection, and the formula of this palette is great, so it is really good to have pretty much the colours of the rainbow in here. But my favourite shade is this shade here, Spirit, which is kind of pearlescent white to look at, but it does have a sort of purple undertone to it. I've now realised, a massive fan of purple eyeshadow. I just don't think it does me any favours. But something like this, where you only see the purple when you turn your head, I think is ideal. So that's why I love this shade so much. Is this one. And that's that. So I don't know how well it will pick up on camera. The next palette is City Limits by IBY Beauty. This is one that I got in a Tribe beauty box last year. I'd never heard of the brand before, but I was really impressed by their formula. There are quite a few shades in here that I do really love, but my instinct when I opened this one was Fire and Ice, which is a duochrome. I don't tend to wear kind of shades this dark or duochromes an awful lot, but when I do, it's this one that I reach for. I'm hoping the swatch will do it justice, because in the pan you can't really tell, but it's this shade here. It just looks quite dark on the finger, and then hopefully, no, the swatch doesn't really do it justice. It is a kind of dark brown shade, but it does have undertones of sort of silvers and blues that come through, but it does look better on the eye. The next palette is the Nubian by Juvia's Place, and this is, I would say, the perfect everyday nude palette. If nudes are your thing and you've not tried a palette from Juvia's Place, this is one I'd highly recommend. My favourite shade is this one here, which unfortunately doesn't have a name, it's just number 4. That's this one. I think this individual shadow is probably the longest lasting eyeshadow that I own, because it just stays in place all day and you don't even necessarily need eyeshadow primer. This one's kind of like a peachy gold. You can kind of see where we're going with this palette, a goldy nude neutral thing. The next palette we have is the Morphe Original Jaclyn Hill palette. And my favourite shade in this for transition is this shade here, which is called Butter. I wish my palette had the names up here like a lot of them do, but mine are on the back, so it's a bit more awkward when you're kind of trying to do things. But this shade, which I say is Butter, is my favourite and one I always go into the crease with. All of these shades that I've swatched so far are ones that I go all over the lid with as my final shimmer. But this is our first transition shade, and this is just a sort of nude brown. So that is that one. These ones don't swatch the best, but they do go beautifully on the eyes and they do blend really nicely. So that's the best I can kind of do with that one. Next we have the palette Meet Matchmaker. This one was a hard decision to make, because I did only want to pick one shade from each palette, because there are quite a few palettes here where I do like more than one shade. And in this one, I was torn between two, being this one here, Kate Javaren, which is a gorgeous pink shimmer shade. But because I had already quite a few shimmers on the go and I needed a good outer corner colour, this one down here, Matt Schneider, is one of my favourite outer corner colours. Because I did want a sort of couple of darker shades to reach for to have for the outer corner, that's why I had to forego the pink one and go with the brown one, because out of all my darker browns I have, this is one of my favourites. This one for me is quite hard to explain. It is just a true dark brown, but it's not cool toned and it's not warm toned. It's somewhere in the middle, which I think is why I like it so much. But if I could add one more shade into all of these, I would have to stick that one in as well, but I'm going for the matte brown. I'm sticking with my decision. So that is this one. It doesn't swatch the best, and it does look slightly more cool toned on the arm than I thought it would, but that is obviously the bottom one here. Then we have the Tarteist Pro To Go palette. This is my go-to travel palette if I'm ever going anywhere for more than one night. This is the palette I tend to take with me. This is another one that was quite a difficult decision. I knew I liked more than one shade in this palette, so this was one of the first ones I actually grabbed when thinking about doing this video. And I nearly went for Dominate, but because it is purple and because I know I don't suit it as much, I ended up going for Boss, which is this rich shimmer chocolate brown. I also did nearly go for Crisp down the bottom here, which is a warm tone brown transition shade, but I do prefer the formula of these two circle shaped ones better than the square shaped ones, which is why I went for this one in the end. But it is a gorgeous sort of rich chocolate brown. And then you can see that one. That was pretty much just one swatch and I've got that much impact of a colour. And we have the Urban Decay Naked Cherry palette, and for this one there's a transition shade in here that I love reaching for, and that is the shade Feels, which is a pink shade, but it's more of a warm pink. It looks absolutely gorgeous in the crease. This one here. As you can see, that one's quite pigmented and just a really nice dusty rose pink colour. Next, keeping in the Urban Decay family, we have the Original Naked palette, and the shade in this for me, again, a palette that I have multiple favourite shades in. I nearly did go for Sin, but I thought I'd kind of covered that base with a few of my shimmers. So I actually went for Book, because I think this is only one of a very few cool toned browns that I have, or kind of nude shades. The only other palette that I think has shades like this is the Jaclyn Hill palette, but I think I prefer the formula of this to the Jaclyn Hill palette, so this is probably my favourite ones. I'd say one of very few that I have that's in this shade. So that is Book. Is this one here, and I'm starting to run out of room on my arm. Maybe should have started right up here because I'm getting right towards the elbow. Also didn't think it through wearing a jumper. The next palette is one of the newer ones to my collection, and that is the Going Coconuts palette from Colourpop. I didn't even take this one into consideration at first because I have only used it a couple of times at this point. I kind of went back to my collection and was looking at every single palette. I realised there was a shade in here that I did immediately fall in love with, and that is the Shell Yeah shade. And this to me is a kind of, I'm so bad at describing shades. This to me is a brown, sort of salmon pinky nudie shade. Is it really? I don't know. But this is such a gorgeous shade, and is one that can be used in the crease or can be used as an outer corner colour as well, because it's dark but not too dark, and it does give your eyes some definition. And the second time I used this palette, that is what I used it as. Having now actually looked, I've realised that shade there, Coularda, is it? Coularda is a bit similar to Book, but maybe I don't want to swatch them next to each other because obviously I've got a whole thing going on here, but I think that's maybe a slightly darker version of Book, so I'm happy to have that in my collection. But again, this is brand new, so I can't have forgotten about it. But yeah, Shell Yeah I think is quite unique to my collection, but overall this is a pretty good palette. That is the shade here. So that is the bottom one. So they are my sort of three transition colours that I picked, and we've got a pink, cool tone brown, and then somewhere in between, so cover all bases with that. Final of the neutrals is the BH Cosmetics Royal Affair palette. And this is a really pretty palette because it does have a nice array of shades. It's got your neutrals, but then it does have your little pops of colour in there as well. Another palette that I do have multiple favourite shades. This one up here, this pink shade Lady, is definitely one of my favourites. But the shade I picked in this palette is the shade Duchess, which is a really rich chocolate brown shade. And it's one of the more warmer browns that I have in my collection that I really love. So because I don't have too much darkness there or outer corner shades, that's why I thought I would go with that one. And I think it is different enough from the one in the Meet Matchmaker palette. So that is the shade Duchess, which is so pigmented, and I've realised I've probably not shown you it on my finger for the rest of them. Obviously definitely richer than the Matchmaker one, because I think that this one's the Meet Matchmaker one here, and then that's obviously the one at the bottom, but it's just it's such a deep rich chocolate brown. That is the sort of neutral section of this eyeshadow palette, and it is one that I would love to use and would regularly reach for and kind of wish I could create. Obviously it's a lot of different formulas. If I could have all these shades and it be from a certain brand, I'm not too sure which brand I would go for, because obviously it's based on formula. I'd either say BH Cosmetics or Urban Decay, but that's probably because I've got a couple of their palettes here, so I obviously do like the formula, but that's the neutral side of things. And then I say I've got 3 more palettes to make a 15 pan look. The first one is another one from Juvia's Place. This is the Douce palette, and I was torn in this one most definitely. The 3 shades I love in here the most is Macaroons, which is this green shade, Mont Blanc, which is this silver shade, and then Puffs, which is this really gorgeous pink shade. I discounted the green one first because I don't reach for green an awful lot. as you can see, I'm obviously a more neutral person. So I thought maybe Mont Blanc, because I do quite like a silver every so often. So I swatched these two side by side, and Puffs is a better shade for me. This one is a bit subtle and does need a bit of working up, whereas this one is straight away, you've got that bright pink shade. So I had to go with this one. When I did pick this one, it made me glad that I didn't pick the one from the Meet Matchmaker, because that is a shimmery pink as well. It is the shade Puffs. So that is the shade at the bottom there. And I couldn't go for a more colourful shimmery look without looking in my Tarte Make Believe in Yourself palette. So this is a predominantly complete shimmer palette. It does have one solitary matte up here, which isn't the best to be honest, but it is just foil shades, metallic shades. And I did struggle to make a choice. I do love the neutral shades in here, but I felt like I had enough of them and I wanted the colour. So I was down to looking at these three shades here. But when I went to Comic-Con at the beginning of March, because I knew people would be dressed up there and things like that, I was more than happy to go kind of outside my comfort zone when it came to makeup. So I didn't mind having a really bright eye look, so I pulled into this palette, and I ended up wearing all three of these blue shades all over my lids, kind of blending into each other. And this shade here, Fairy, was my favourite one out of the three that I applied. So I'm glad that I did that to be able to directly compare these three shades. Don't get me wrong, all three of them are gorgeous, but I really like this one because it's slightly different. I can't actually describe the shade of blue. It's kind of like bluey purple. There probably is a shade name for it kind of thing, but I'm rubbish at describing colours, as you've realised in this video. But yeah, this is such a pretty shade, so I wanted to include this one. That is it there. So when it is swatched, it is definitely a blue sort of purple toned colour. See, I'm still not going bright, but I'm injecting a bit of colour. And then the final palette is the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. Now this isn't one of my most favourite palettes, but it does have colour in it. Because I'd already picked a shade from the Weekend Festival palette, I didn't want to go back into that one for a brighter colour and then have to swap around. I'd already kind of locked that one in, so that's why I pulled into this one. And there are a few shades in here that I do really love, one of which being the shade Big Sky. This is, I would say, on like the turquoise spectrum, but a really muted kind of turquoise. It's probably not a turquoise, but that's what I see when I think about it. But I do generally like all three of these colours. I just don't wear them an awful lot, but I went for Big Sky in the end because I think it could tie in quite nicely. And we have just about enough room here. There's that one at the bottom there. Oh yeah, that is the, I can't really see it because of where I've swatched it. Obviously this is the first time that I have actually swatched it, I've just looked at the shade, so excuse me a moment while I kind of admire my palette. You can obviously see a difference in formulas with swatching, but swatching isn't a true representation. There's a couple of shades here that were a bit on the swatch, but I know they blend beautifully on the eye. But overall, I would purchase that palette if I could get all that in one go. Say these little sort of subtle bits of colour down the end here, and then you've got a couple of pink shades, a couple of brown shades, and then your slightly different ones at the shade, like the really true gold, the greenish shade, and then the shimmery shade. This one from the IBY City Limits palette, and the one above it, which I think was from the BH Cosmetics palette. I kind of want to try those on top of each other, because even though this is a duochrome and does have kind of flecks in it, this one above it got similar flecks in it, so I might be quite tempted to try that more all over my lid and then put that on the inner half of the eye. I think that might be a quite nice little combo. I do tend to be a person that does just pull into one palette. It's not very often that I will pull into multiple palettes for one look, but something like this kind of makes me want to. Start from the top. This was really fun to do, especially in the times we are in. Something like this was really good to kind of distract me and take my mind off things. And if you do have multiple eyeshadow palettes, I would suggest it's quite a fun little game to play. You create your own ideal palette. But that is it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're not already. Thanks.